So as part of Walk the Talk with Kunal Vasudeva, today I'm at this, one of my favorite restaurant. It's called Tablespoon, owned by a dear friend of mine, Varun Tuli. Started off with Yum Yum Tree, branched into Yum Yum Cha. Today has Tablespoon and Pot. And what an incredible experience and what an incredible episode it's going to be for all of us. I can't wait to share this episode with you. Great conversations, great food, great insights about food and beverage, great insights about the industry. And he is known for his outspokenness. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed recording this episode with Varun. Hey Varun.
Hi.
Love the vibe.
Thank you.
Love the place, what you have done with it.
Lovely to have you here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So this is our newest brand.
Yeah.
It's called Tablespoon. It's basically a Italian-American restaurant which mimics sitting in a kitchen. So everything around you looks like you're in a kitchen, and kept the name simple for people to remember, to understand. Tablespoon is also a 4-letter abbreviation, and the idea is to sit in a kitchen and serve food quickly. So it's apt for a kitchen abbreviation.
And the ochre color is it for a reason?
I think we needed it in an eye-catching color. It was something that we went through many colors, and there was no color that really kind of stood out.
Okay.
As well as this.
Yeah. So I'll let you know a secret. I've been here a couple of times.
Yeah.
Both this one as well as in the Gurgaon. It's an absolutely brilliant place.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's great.
Thank you.
Season 2 of Talk with Kunal Vasudeva is called Walk with Kunal Vasudeva.
Right.
And we are in your environment. I told you this before. I genuinely feel that all your 3 brands, right? And I have been a patron of all the 3 brands. My children have been a patron of 3 brands. Are absolutely extraordinary.
Thank you so much.
And I use my words very careful and I say extraordinary. What you have reached today, and let's kind of go back to your very early years.
Right.
When perhaps you may have been in school, and I assume you're a Delhi born and
Delhi,
educated
right
person. I read somewhere food was inherent in your family, right?
Right.
But where did you get that passion for food? Chief Eating Officer. You're still a founder, but you call yourself a Chief Eating Officer.
I do.
Let's just kind of go back to where it all began.
So I think my familiarity for food started with cooking at home or helping my mom cook. I was not a very outgoing child, so I would spend a lot of time at home. And I would be attracted to be standing in the kitchen because that's where my mother was most of the time. So I would start getting interested in what she was cooking. And in fact, Chinese, because she's from Bombay as well. I believe you're from Bombay. Chinese was her favorite cuisine. And she would cook a lot of Asian food at home. And I guess maybe somewhere at the back of my mind, Asian became something that I was, I'd seen the most. So I think it definitely started there, in the kitchen. And this I'm talking about between the ages of 7 and 8, probably around that time. Post that, we were very fortunate as children. We would travel a lot. My dad had an export business and still does in machine tools. And he would kind of try and take us to a different country every year. So we'd always... we'd go a lot to the US, but we'd also go a lot to Europe. We'd also go a lot to Asia and other parts of the world. So you had
very early exposure diverse culture.
Correct. Right. And somewhere when we were traveling, it was always, either the family was also enjoyed eating. It was almost a given that whenever you go to another country, you eat the food of that country.
True.
And you don't necessarily look for Indian food. So we were never a family looking for Indian restaurants. or carrying packed food with us or anything of that
So
sort.
that experimentation with food was very early.
Experimentation started like that,
Mm.
right? So, for example, when I was very, very young, maybe I was, I think 11 or 12, we went to Australia,
Mm.
and I remember eating sushi there for the first time.
Mm.
And, the concept of raw fish was very new, even then, even for the world. And very slowly, it kind of started becoming very easy. So, for us to,
Did you take a dollop of wasabi at that time? Did you know what it was?
no, I actually probably just took it, I think it was off a buffet.
Yeah.
And I kind of would eat sushi on its own.
Uh,
Wasabi probably came a lot later.
yeah.
Luckily,
I made a fool out of myself in Dubai, one of
Yeah.
the restaurants. And I thought it was something to do with chickpeas.
right?
First time exposure to sushi. I bawled my eyes out from that experience.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a very interesting rush.
It's a
It's a very interesting
rush.
rush. Yeah, it clears all your sinuses.
So
Yeah.
let's when you talk about the early childhood again, did you not think of, let's say, going into some culinary institution around the world?
Of course, I did.
Okay.
But like I said, my dad's business was into machine tools, and I think so. I did start cooking when I was very young, but then very quickly I lived in a joint family, and my uncle and aunt and other people weren't very fond of a boy cooking in the house, or it was not necessarily
Bawarchi banna.
that it wasn't something that kids would kind of do.
It was
So I was
limited to
encouraged.
passion is absolutely
Correct. So
fine.
it transitioned from being in the kitchen to then eating at some of the most unique restaurants and street food areas in the world, and then it came back to kind of cooking again once I went to college. Now, before I went to college, that was also the time where a lot of cooking shows would kind of come up, and I naturally would kind of watch more international shows than Indian shows, and I wanted to do culinary arts, and at worst I would want to do hotel management. At that time, Cornell was where I wanted to go, or I wanted to go to Culinary Institute of America, which is the original
and continues to be
and
the
continues to
OG
be the OG
I would
of
say.
correct.
Yeah.
And my parents thought that it was something that could also be done later on in life, and at the very basic level, they thought engineering was so I did engineering. So I'm an engineer by education. And,
Mechanical, I'm assuming?
Industrial.
Because of the tools.
Because of the tools, it was supposed to be electrical.
Okay.
Thought about mechanical for a bit. It was too hardcore for me.
Okay.
And industrial involved a little bit of ops, a little bit of supply chain, a little bit of logistics,
Got it.
that kind of stuff. So industrial became something that I felt was maybe at that point was the easiest.
And that was in India?
No, that was in the US.
Got
That
it.
was in the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign.
So pretty much the undergraduate was in the US.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time in the US. Of course, you'd eat in the US the way Americans eat. In fact, my maximum influence in food is from the US. I feel the US and India are both extremely similar cultures when it comes to F&B, when it comes to enjoying yourself, when it comes to laziness, as in how much time you spend at leisure. So, for example, you would spend a couple of hours in the evening going out for dinner or sitting with your friends, or India was also a culture that very happily bastardized non-Indian food very easily. So they were quick
That's what
to
they have done over there as well.
correct.
Yeah.
So American Chinese is a very important parallel to Indian Chinese.
So right.
So when we did sushi, for example, for us, looking at America was the easiest because there was no Indian sushi.
Is it because again everything was adapted there to
Everything was adapted. So
for the immigrant
in the US,
population, right?
absolutely. So
Yeah.
everything in the US was adapted. In India, people had a habit of adapting everything as well here, right?
Because the palates are different.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so when we looked at sushi, for example, rather than looking at Japan and
We
people
looked
who
at the
started
US.
very early on looking at sushi would actually look at Japan, for example, right? Or they would look at other Asian countries and they would look at traditional restaurants, and they would be, tatami rooms with very, very boring or very traditional
I
ways of
understand,
serving
yeah.
food. And of course, very, very bland. But then when we looked at sushi in the US, there were sauces and different things. So, a lot of people used to say that the sushi is Indianized, and I would never say it's Indianized. I would say it's not authentic, but it's Americanized more than anything else. So we looked at the US in terms of
And
consumption.
I'm going to talk about this maybe a little later about it, and we need to kind of talk about the fact that, of course, India is that ascending economy. There is more nuanced taste which is happening.
Right.
But is there a case to argue for, let's say, that authentic, I would say, or an adapted taste?
Right.
Right?
But what is authentic anymore?
Yeah.
So authentic, in my opinion, only exists in houses now. If you really want to go back and try and figure out, you want to talk to somebody and say that where does the best or most authentic food of a particular cuisine happen? Yes, there are regions that kind of would happen. But if somebody was to come 20 years ago to India and would say, oh, I want to eat authentic Indian food, let's go to a restaurant. There was no authentic food in restaurants.
And again, authenticity is more subjective.
Right.
To you, it may be different. To me, it may be different.
So for each culture,
correct,
restaurants usually are a place to escape. Now, of course, more evolved markets are now starting to do what you would do at home, because you eat to eat sometimes and not just to enjoy. But typically, you would eat to get out of the house or to have something that you wouldn't be able to make at home, right?
True.
So the ability to have original or authentic food started fading away. And a lot of ingredients started getting borrowed. The top French chefs all over the world use Japanese ingredients all the time. They use some Thai ingredients, they use some Indian ingredients. In fact, I was fortunate enough to eat at Austria Franciscana a couple of weeks back with Massimo Bottura. And he was right there. And his new menu is a global menu.
Yeah.
He calls it Globale. And it has, each course is an influence of his travel from a different country. So there's Mexico, there's Lebanon, there's India, there's China, there is, basically every part of the world.
So you come back an engineer from the US and you decide to open a restaurant.
Yep.
Where did this transition happen?
So I started working with my dad for a very, very short period. I didn't enjoy that at all. At the same time, my dad and his brother, who were partners in the business, decided to go their separate ways. And I thought it was a perfect exit for me to go out and try and do what I really wanted to do.
And was the family supportive at that time?
They were extremely supportive. Extremely supportive. Though at some level, I feel that they felt that kitna dur chale jayega. It was one of those. Okay, go do what you want.
Yeah.
Let's see how long you last kind of situation.
And we'll always welcome you back.
Yeah, we'll always welcome you back. But at the same time, my mom, for example, she did the interiors for the first Yum Yum Cha, for the first restaurant for Yum Yum Tree. And it was something that, she was very, very keen that I find my own kind of place. And she felt that the family business was fairly toxic at that time. I was the youngest. My father was the youngest. I was the youngest in the office, of course. And there were a lot of things that you would not get the kind of freedom that you wanted to. So somewhere she felt that it was better for me to be on my own.
Varun, for our global audiences who are not familiar with Delhi, especially, take us through that memory lane of Yum Yum Tree. And I think it was that brand was, at least that restaurant was for about 8 or 10 years. If I'm not mistaken.
So we ran that restaurant for 8 years.
Yeah.
And
it was a Pan-Asian, right?
It was a Pan-Asian restaurant. It was a 9-year lease, but 1 year was of fit outs, etc. So it was a little over 8, just slightly over 8 years where we ran that restaurant. It was a Pan-Asian restaurant. It was in a restaurant. The location was New Friends Colony, which is nearer to Noida. The reason we chose that space was because in 2006, when we were looking for properties, Delhi had gone through the peak of what was sealing at that time.
True.
Properties started
South
getting
X
sealed.
And all those things.
In fact, Khan Market was also sealed. Defense Colony was sealed. The entire Hoskas village, and there were many regions where the government said that these spaces are not legal spaces
anymore. Yeah.
So this was the only legal restaurant space that existed. So we just happened to find
As
something
a standalone space.
as a standalone
Except for
space.
maybe inside Manor, you had Indian accent.
No,
No,
it wasn't
that
there
came
at that
later.
time. That still came later. And Manor had a license of a hotel. So that was still not independent,
True,
right?
true.
So this was actually the lease, and the lease deed from the government actually said there was no address of this restaurant, right? So it was no 1, 2, 3, 4. All it said was restaurant was the name of the property, community center, New Friends Colony. So this was one of the only spaces that was legally kind of auctioned or sold to be a restaurant.
And why pan-Asian? Here you were a global,
Right.
I would say,
So
citizen.
we originally, correct. So
Yeah.
as I had mentioned, my mother may have been a big influence when I was cooking, and her favorite food was Chinese. It was actually more of a commercial call where we felt that the most common cuisine for people to consider going out for was Asian. Of course, there was Indian, but Indian only existed in the form of Mughlai. And being from abroad and your influences being primarily from outside India, the choice was between maybe Italian or Chinese. There was no Pan-Asian, by the way, at that time. Pan-Asian
And
as
most
a
of the restaurants
cuisine.
were embedded inside hotels. They were their own hotel restaurants.
Yeah,
most
so
of them.
all restaurants, I mean, there were some pseudo Pan-Asian restaurants, like, for example, T.K.'s at the Hyatt did have Pan-Asian flavors. It was positioned as a Japanese restaurant, did have Pan-Asian flavors, but there was no true Pan-Asian restaurant at that point. We were actually the first Pan-Asian restaurant.
So it was more deliberate. You saw there was a gap.
There
and
was
you
an
said, you know,
opportunity. There was an opportunity. It was supposed to be in the Chinese space. The space itself we found was very, very large. We felt that only one cuisine would not work. In fact, we chose the name Yum Yum Tree because we didn't know if the cuisine would stick.
Yeah.
You know,
So it was
we were on
agnostic.
the first, correct. So we were on the first floor. One of the name ideas was China Market. Because everybody was China Garden, China Kitchen, China this,
And that
China
would still
that.
say it's a very Chinese.
And it
kind
would
of
still,
cuisine.
you know, kind of go into that kind of realm of the naming convention. But the idea was that if Chinese doesn't work and we needed to make it multi-cuisine or, you know, some other cuisine, we were able to kind of do that.
Varun, I need to kind of delve into the fact that here again, you came back from the US, you were an undergraduate, business family, all those things are okay. But the fact that you still chose your passion,
Right.
you knew cooking, but you did not know the unit economics of cooking.
Yeah. So I think
How did that transition happen? Or was it like, you know what, you entered and you figured it out?
we really entered and figured it out. But one of the other catalysts was a friend of mine who was my business partner for a short duration, who helped me start this restaurant, Yogesh Sajnani from the US, from my college. He was a roommate of mine in one of the years in college. He really wanted to open a restaurant because he wanted to move away from his family business. So he really encouraged us. So I think the original thought was not to come back to India at all. It was to kind of open a restaurant perhaps in Dubai or in London or something like that. You know, as recent graduates, and I'm sure you see a lot of recent graduates, the dreams, you know, your dreams touch the sky and you feel you kind of can do anything you want, right? And so the ambitions were sky high. And the idea was that we wanted to kind of do something. And when we looked at Dubai and we looked at the fact that you couldn't have liquor licenses in independent spaces in Dubai, we then transitioned to kind of doing this in Delhi. You know, he lived in Dubai and I lived in Delhi. So one of the two was always the natural.
And I also believe it was a very large format.
It was a very large format.
Right? And when you transition from Yum Yum Tree to your brands, the first came was Yum Yum Cha. It was from a large format to a shorter format, right?
So when we started Yum Yum Tree, we had consultants at the time. I wouldn't want to name them, but they kind of almost took us for a ride. You know, our kitchen was maybe not even 10% of the size of our total area, right? In terms of square foot. Today, our kitchens are 50% of our area, right?
Because that itself is an experience.
That itself is an experience because we could not. I think we did have a lot of popularity in the beginning. I don't think we could kind of sustain it because we didn't have the infrastructure to be able to sustain it. So, for example, when we had busy shifts like Sunday brunches, or we had a party in one of the, you know, we had 3 distinct rooms. One of them was a bar area, which meant, you know, it became a party room. The kitchen could not cope. It could not do a la carte and you know, party catering at the same time. So it became very, very challenging from an infrastructure perspective. So yes, it was very large, but this was the only single spot that was available, which was legally apt to kind of open a restaurant at that time. So it was something that, we couldn't avoid.
Yeah.
We had to kind of open this large
And
format.
this was you sustained it for like this particular restaurant was
yeah.
about 8-10 years?
Just
8
a little
years.
over 8 years.
And then you decide, you know what? I need to sunset this and I need to start.
No, we did Yum Yum Cha before that.
We
did Yum Yum Cha before that. So of course, Yum Yum Tree was very large. It was not in the best location. It had a lot of dependency on alcohol and offers and deals related to alcohol. So when we opened Yum Yum Cha, we basically wanted to kind of keep the good, which was some of the food which was fairly appreciated, and then discard the bad. So for example, we chose a great location. In fact, Khan Market was supposed to be our first location, and we had a few issues there. But we eventually, zeroed in on Select City Walk. Arjun, who owns the mall, is very, very supportive of that kind of move and change, etc. The space itself was very small.
Brands, I know Arjun very well.
So the space was very small. So we did the opposite of whatever Yum Yum Tree did, right? So we did no alcohol, we did no discounts or offers, no alcohol. I mean, no. In fact, we didn't even do the top selling dishes that Yum Yum Tree did.
But let's kind of go back from the original restaurant to, let's say, the newer format, right?
So Yum Yum Tree was not making money. Okay, it was too large. We had to do a second restaurant. We had started catering at that time.
So are you saying such large formats in India, especially with high rentals, will never make money?
No, that's not true. Okay. There are. I think it depends on your focus. It depends on the price point as well. It also depends on the location. I think this old adage about location is very much true. I think people want to go where it's convenient to kind of go to. But let's say if you have a large dosa place, okay. Friends of mine open, for example, in fact, we work with them in catering as well. Rameshwaram Cafe, they believe in, so they believe in very large spaces. They're able to fill them up. So I would say that
because
really
again,
large,
that particular cuisine or fast food, I think it appeals to a very large audience.
A Haldiram would
appeals to a very large,
but
again, it's very different in India as well.
Right. So it's not that spaces would not, but I think when you go to very, very expensive locations, it becomes that much more difficult to kind of do it. Second thing that I would like to kind of say is that, you see, a restaurant is a door. I am going to a restaurant. There are only so many people who would choose you in the day, right? The larger you are, the more difficult it is to fill up. So if somebody says, I want to go to Yum Yum Cha, they just want to go to Yum Yum Cha. There's only so many people that will say that they want to go to Yum Yum Cha. So why make it so large that someone does not want to kind of walk into a restaurant?
Correct.
Most people want to go to a restaurant that is already full. Right? And if there is waiting outside, they want to. Even here, we have a pot next door and we have a tablespoon. Of course, we are in between lunch and dinner. But whichever one fills up first is where people actually go before. And the smaller the restaurant, the easier it is to fill up. Right? And you can always play with the time someone takes at the restaurant. You have to optimize space.
In your own opinion right now, as a restaurateur, multi cuisine, is this concept passé today?
No, it isn't. I would not say any concept is passé. See, I would like to, when we're talking about the business of restaurants, let's remember that India, because especially cities like Delhi and Bombay, which were highly displaced populations, they would want security. So first thing they would do is buy a property and then decide on something to do with it, right? So most restaurants were in owned properties. They were not in rented properties. This concept of renting properties to do a restaurant and give somebody else money is very new. We also didn't have the best squatting laws. So trying to rent your property to someone else would be, probably better and smarter to do your own business in that property. So a lot of commercial spaces would kind of come in. Now, as prices of real estate grew, it came a point where you couldn't just snap your fingers and buy a property, because the real cost. So, for example, if we looked at a property yesterday for rent, the cost of renting was 15 lakhs a month, but the cost of purchasing was 50 crores, right? So, you cannot.
But even at that high rentals, I don't know how businesses would ever make money.
Therefore, you open a smaller restaurant.
Therefore, you open a
Smaller restaurant. So
and
you take
turn around the tables
and you
quicker.
turn around the tables faster. And at the end of the day, people will come to your restaurant because they say we want to go to X restaurant. They're not calculating how big or small the restaurant is from before. So,
yeah, the chefs who are here, and I'm looking at the chefs all around, right? Are they coming in with some kind of a formal training, or are they more the apprenticeship-based model where I have my passion,
right,
I'll attach with somebody,
right,
and I'll work my way through?
So we definitely give points to people for education, but eventually skill beats everything else. I think once somebody enters the door and gets into an interview with anybody in our company, they're basically treated the same way. It doesn't matter what experience you've had, where you work. Because in general, we do not ape or copy anybody else. Now, there are a lot of people who are inspired by what we do and they are able to, but we try not to replicate what somebody else is doing. So it's not that I'm hiring you because you went, you were working at a particular restaurant and I need your dish. I basically need to look at your character. I need to look at your work ethic. I need to see how many years you've given to companies. If you've moved every 6 months, that's not necessarily very positive. And at the end of the day, I need to see your skill. So
I think the next 10 years, 15 years, more consumption will happen in India.
Yeah, of
the
course.
ascension of India, which is happening, 4 trillion to 10 trillion, takes people to a completely different orbit.
Right.
Hypothesis tomorrow, right? I give you need to open, let's say, 30 restaurants. Do you think an apprenticeship-based model would work better in an environment like India? Or should, again, a formal training should be a prerequisite?
No, I think an apprenticeship system would work actually much better.
Much better.
In fact, most of our team has had apprenticeship training.
And it could be some relative or some friend or someone who has passion at the end of the day.
Or they could have been freshers at a place. I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of India, I'm talking about India that is, maybe 40 plus today, for example, which the millennials are getting older. But let's say millennials, for example, a lot of the people from smaller towns are still not very educated. I think, 8th, 10th, 12th pass. I mean, 12th pass was a big deal. I don't think they pursued education beyond the 12th grade, right?
Yeah.
Now, when you have that and the person wants to get into, they have a passion and they want to kind of get into a particular industry, I feel that hospitality is one of those. And worldwide, hospitality is a very hard line to sustain in, because the amount of work that is required
is intense.
And you would see that as we move into future generations, we see the reluctance of today's generation wanting to work.
I am from education. You know that. This is my second venture.
Right.
I'll tell you, and from my own point of view, where the problem lies in India is early education. When we force our children to learn in English.
Right.
I think early education should be in the mother tongue,
of
what
tongue,
they
of course.
Understand.
Right.
Now, what really happens, they fear the language.
Right.
They don't get the confidence. They don't muster up that confidence when they progress.
Right.
And that's when they step out of the system, because higher education is only in English.
Right.
Right. If we correct that, two things happen. Students retain in the system.
Right.
Right. And more students retaining in the system would mean more graduates. Gross enrollment ratio would be better. More. Number two, academic and skill needs to be at par.
Right.
Pretty much Australia.
Right.
Germany, Singapore. Right. If you are a BWalk, let's say culinary, it's exactly the same as B Tech.
Right.
computer science.
Right.
Those fault lines in India now are being rectified.
Yeah, but so for example, when we hire, right, and a lot of people maybe don't appreciate or get it, and I think you may get it. Let's say that a server has been hired, right, and if they have to serve at a table, they are absolutely encouraged and authorized to speak in the language that makes them most comfortable. The idea is to articulate themselves clearly, distinctly, and even if somebody asks a question in English, please feel free to respond in Hindi. And I've lost count of the number of restaurants where I've gone to where I see the other person struggling to respond in English, and maybe their employers feel that they need to speak in English.
By the virtue you just said this, Varun, my respect for you is right there. And this is where one of the biggest problem is. And the airline industry rectified this or identified this in a very long time. So when I spoke about the Kingfisher, right, we would say that the crew members speak in English, Hindi, Marathi, Gujarati, whoever.
Right.
So because that tube had all kind of passengers.
Of course.
You with an Anglo-Saxon accent and perhaps somebody with a very native Marathi accent or a native Gujarati.
Sure.
And they would kind of feel comfortable.
Sure.
And you doing that, I think if our servers speak in the language they understand.
Right.
Because eventually, बोलते हैं आँखों से और यहाँ से service होती है. This is nothing. This is nothing. So that.
See, you have 2 minutes to communicate to a guest. You also have very little patience. And of course, in our restaurants, we want high turnaround time, right? Yeah. So we don't want somebody spending all their time trying to work there, right?
Yeah.
So if a person can, satiate the customer
in a language
universal, and we saw zero resistance. We saw, I mean, we started this very early, and we saw absolutely zero resistance. I mean, we have a manager in one of our restaurants. She's been with us since we opened, since Yum Yum Tree. So now, going on 17, 18 years, who still doesn't speak very fluent English.
Brilliant.
And,
I love it.
But
in my opinion, shouldn't be political, but Narendra Modi, for instance, is one of the best orators today in the world, in a language which he understands, and communicating with everybody.
Right. He also chooses to make others uncomfortable by choosing to speak in our language, even though he may be able to communicate, but in foreign countries, he chooses to speak in Hindi and have a translator.
I was speaking about this with you earlier. There is service and then there is food. And everything is an experience.
Right.
The food on a plate is an experience. The glass is an experience. How important is it for a restaurant to balance this? Right? Logic says good food, good experience. I'm like to assume great product fit.
Food in the business of restaurants, and you can record it and replay it. Food is incidental in restaurants. Okay, I would say that the things around food that are so important, more than just the food itself, right? So, for example, merchandising of your menu, the selection that is available. Temperature. People completely forget temperature. In a country like ours, which is both hot and cool, I mean, city like Delhi, it can get very cold or it can get very warm.
But Indians love hot food.
Correct. So what is hot should be hot. What is cold should be cold, right? There is no ambient temperature because the temperature you are playing with in terms of your, is not going to exist, in the way that, some other culture has imagined it to be, right? Red wines, for example, are still served at horrible temperatures. They need to be at 12 to 15 degrees. 15 is the absolute outermost that you can take them to. And sorry about that.
No problem at all.
But so concept of the restaurant, your menu selection, your temperature of the food, what and how kind of comes out, pricing of your food, what your food looks like is sometimes far more important than the food itself.
Would you be one of the few restaurateurs today in India who has a training team supporting both the kitchens as well as the service side?
Yes. And
Right?
we believe in training very heavily, and
Hmm.
especially when you talk about things like, in fact, there is a chef who we work with in Dubai, and we use a lot of, we work with a lot of people who are experts in their fields abroad, and we bring them in for training and other things. And in fact, one of them is venturing out on his own, and this conversation I had just before you entered was about this. That training does not exist for the kitchen. So, for example, service training still exists because people look at it, the suit boot type of, the white collar, blue collar type of thing. So there is no real blue collar training that exists anywhere in the world, right?
True.
It's called apprenticeship or it's called.
Yeah.
But I feel that training
That structured training,
structured
recurring training, repeated training.
even something as simple as holding a pan, tossing a pan, boiling a pasta, boiling rice, washing rice. These are things that are very, very important because you need to learn how to do those things, right? Making dough, you're not just, here in India, you're expected to look at somebody and eventually figure it out, right? You're not given X task and given the tools to kind of take care of that task, right? So
When I'm talking to you, Varun, I get a feeling that you could be a chef tomorrow, you could be a server, you could be someone who could just print the invoice
Right.
or the bill, and you could be the housekeeping. You've done it all.
I've done it all and I continue to do it all,
Yeah.
right? So at times, in fact,
And do you think that's the recipe for success for a restaurant?
of course, so I think it's the recipe for success for any industry that when you're delegating responsibility, you should know how to do that responsibility yourself, right?
True.
So, for example, if you're trying to tell someone how to cook, see, I'm very, very close to the kitchen. Kitchen is my zone. I set all my recipes, I cook them myself, etc. If I'm trying to tell someone what to do and what to change, I should be able to show it myself, right? And I should be able to make it, and it should be appreciated or sold, when it comes to the restaurant. And if I don't know how to do that, then I should step aside and let the person who understands that particular
How much
job.
of the cuisine that you create needs to suit your palate vis-a-vis, let's say, a consumer palate?
I would say 50% is my palate. There are my favorites. There are things which it used to take me 3 to 4 years to take something off the menu that I was married to.
And it's also because the fact that, because you're leading from the front,
Right.
if I am satisfied,
Right.
right, because you demand so much from yourself.
Right.
If I am satisfied, 90% chances are my customer will be satisfied.
Yes and no. I feel that you should not make food or serve food according to your own palate.
Okay.
Yes, there are your favorites, and those favorites should suit your palate, and you should be serving those dishes in the manner you feel are the most fit, right? But for example, I don't like. My favorite Asian dish is chicken and egg fried rice. We don't serve chicken and egg fried rice. It doesn't suit us. We have no dish in Yum Yum Cha that has egg in it. So
And is there a reason for that? Is it that
it
in
doesn't.
starch, protein,
We need a specific. We do it in a stone pot.
Got it.
We have a particular process. You have to pre-cook ingredients, and
Yeah.
pre-cooking eggs would make them smell, and it's not a very good experience to have pre-cooked eggs,
I
right?
can tell you the quinoa. I'm not
Stone
sure.
pot, stone pot,
my
yeah.
God. It's next level.
So imagine kind of trying to do something that would only suit you, and we didn't choose the wok for making a rice
Yeah.
because only one dish can be made at one time.
True.
In our stone pots, we can make multiple at the same time.
Yeah.
And you can't order regular fried rice, right? I don't like saffron. Doesn't mean that I'm not going to put saffron in my biryani when I serve it,
The
right?
stone pot, was it influenced by something that you saw, or this
Yeah,
is for something that you were doing?
by Korea, by bibimbap. Except we chose to kind of do it in different flavors here
and adapt it to
and adapt it to what we like. Still Asian flavors, but
Yeah.
still screw it up like a good Indian,
Yeah.
So we kind of do that all the time, and we do it really well in India, where we
Let's go back to the restaurant thing again. It's when I look at you, you are fully involved in everything.
right.
Now, when you're expanding your brands, right, do you have the sense of fear that I'm letting go? Because you have brands now,
Sure.
again, between Delhi and NCR all over,
Sure.
right? You're here. when I'm talking to you, your mind must be at the Gurgaon outlet right now.
Right.
What must be happening? How do you balance that?
No, so I think COVID did really well for us in the sense that I think COVID was our fastest period of growth that we've seen in recent years. Pre-COVID and post-COVID, we were 3x of the number. We had 400 employees when we began. Pre-COVID, and we have 1,200 now. So, in 3 years we tripled.
And is that because of more outlets, or perhaps
by getting into new areas like delivery?
Got it.
Of course, there were a few new outlets as well, new brands that kind of opened as well. But what happened was, I was one of those caredy pokes in COVID. My first flight was in October 21. October 21 is a really...
And you would have worn a double mask and all this.
Yeah, I was double, triple mask. I had a young, and still, though he's a little older now, my son is 6.5 now. So during COVID, he was fairly young, and I was very scared. And I think for the first 3 months, I didn't even leave my front door. So I think I was forced to kind of delegate. I was a micromanager pre-COVID, and I was able to realize that by giving away certain tasks, there were so many hands and talents.
So sometimes these situations which are forced upon you, you rediscovered yourself, that you can
write. Like you can let somebody else kind of be your extension and your eyes and ears and your the ability. And in fact my wife thinks I've let go too much. So it's the opposite now.
I'll tell you where my respect for you again goes 2 notches higher is during COVID time you did not lose any of your staff members.
No,
we took care of them, right? Despite the tsunami that kind of hit.
So we were able to retain pretty much 100%, other than the people who chose to get out of hospitality as a business completely. There were some that quit and came back after 6 months, and we were able to kind of keep them as well. I think when COVID hit, we looked at, I think we were in a very good financial position. Sometimes you aren't.
Is that because you're a prudent businessman? For you, cash in your balance sheet?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
So we never look at. So I think we work very differently. We're not funded. We don't have any partners. Other than my partner who had started with me, who I returned his, and he exited very early on. So we are 100% self-owned, right? And I till date, and I don't know if you believe this or not, we don't know how to calculate food cost in our company. Okay, we don't calculate food costs. We have no way of finding out what the food cost.
Is it you don't want to calculate?
We don't want to calculate.
You, that satisfaction of that guest trumps everything else.
Trumps everything.
Profit later.
So we look at the only way of us to gauge financial health was what is in the bank. So rather than do all these, and of course we are fortunate, we have a lot of accountants and we have a lot of people helping us, and they make all these giant sheets. They still don't do food cost.
But for you, still that customer satisfaction, that NPS
absolutely
will trump everything else.
Yes. And if the dish is not selling, you can of course the new Instagram keeps telling you to raise prices if you want to sell more. That's a different way of looking at math. But at the end of the day, we want to be competitive in the marketplace, right? If you have 2 products that are higher and lower and they're identical, you would choose the cheaper product, right? And if they are the same price, you would choose the better product, right? So it's not enough in, like your friend, Mr. Bhatia and Indigo, for example, has shown us that you have to be better and cheaper at the same time. You cannot be one or the other, right? So, and of course, once you have, at least in restaurants, you have this ability to increase your prices of really popular things or things that only you do, where there are no comparatives of other things, but you have to be competitive.
But for a long-term sustainability, and I come from the fact that there are expiry dates to a lot of restaurants, lounges, bars, but for a long-term sustainability, is it a sweet spot on pricing? When you look at Indians and their habits.
Yes. And I think it ties in with volume. Okay. You sell enough to make enough, right? A lot of restaurants make the mistake of opening their space, getting 50 people a day, and then expecting to, kind of uh,
fit the P&L
P&L
into it.
later, right? Now, if you rotate fast enough, right? Again, I won't take the name of a very, very famous Japanese restaurant where I went to eat in Delhi, and both my wife and I ended up in hospital because, our stomachs were very upset because the food probably was just sitting there. Raw fish was just sitting there for a while, right? Now,
was not stored properly.
If we looked at, sushi in our restaurant, so one thing which I said is has to move. If it doesn't move, it's not going to happen, right? It's not going to work, right? Even now, for example, we are looking at launching black cod, and we want to price it at the lowest price that you can find it, and not the lowest
someone
quality
can afford.
Someone can afford it, right? It makes sense. It makes logical sense to sit in a restaurant and be able to do that. And once you do that, you can work with your supplier to buy more. Okay, you can make micro profits, and eventually, you still have the same rent. Whether you have 400 people a day or 40 people a day, you still have the same rent. You still have the same salaries to pay. You still have the same electricity, the gas, etc. So why not just have more people enter your restaurant, right? It also goes in the fact that you're selling more. Your restaurant is always full, so people want to enter.
Pre-COVID, would you say you were more risk averse?
Yes.
Right? And post-COVID, of course, things have kind of changed.
Yes, of course.
Tablespoon Pot is a post-COVID brand.
It's during COVID, very quickly within COVID. Yeah.
And for the first time, you moved out of Pan-Asian into, I would say, American, Italian.
Yeah, right? But it wasn't that. We have a catering company as well, right? So we do wedding catering, and we have.
And it's been there for some time now.
And it's been there for a long time. In fact, that was our second brand that we opened, Food Inc. by Yum Yum Tree.
And people love it.
Yeah. So we do a lot of weddings, and we are fortunate enough to be able to do a lot of weddings all over the country, and as well as destination weddings abroad.
And those come from central commissaries?
Also central commissaries, same kind of commissaries, right? And we basically, we had an entire catering team that was not able to work.
Got it.
And catering, of course, other than Asian, had a bakery, it had European, and it had Indian. So we chose to create a concept for each of them to make each department P&L positive, right? And literally the logic was to kind of let them each make their own money. So we did VT, which was for the bakery. We did Pot for Indian, and we did Tablespoon here for the European chefs.
Tablespoon, open kitchen environment, open Italian environment. Pot, I love the name. I know this story. Right? But for the audiences, what is Pot?
So Pot originally was envisioned as a brand name for another brand, for another cuisine, right? And I we've had some trouble with IP, and we've chosen to protect ourselves way before the problem kind of occurs, right? And I feel that IP protection in India is very hard, and you need to be on it all the time, right? So when we decided we wanted to open an Indian delivery brand, and of course everybody was looking at delivery brands, the first name that came to mind was Indie, right? And we created the logos, and I, in fact, was creating everything myself and the logos myself, etc. And we pretty much finalized everything, and we had a con call with our entire team, and I just was looking at some data, and I saw the brand folder, trademark, and I asked them, what about doing Pot, right? And when I said that, everybody started laughing. They said that, it's like, reminds you of going to the loo.
Or
Pat maybe.
Yeah.
And at that time, my son was 2 years old. And I asked him, what do you think? Should I call it Indie or should I call it Pot? And he said Pot, of course, a 2-year-old.
And he also wanted to celebrate the pots and pans.
Yes. So that story came later. But this was the story about why.
Original by the pot.
And then we decided to kind of figure out what to fit in that, in that name, right? And so when I asked him and I told everyone, well, he is my customer, you are not. My target audience rests at that age and not the older. And then we looked at everything that would fit the word pot. So it went into pots and pans, went into pottery, went into
And the original cuisine, let's say the rajma chawal comes in a pressure cooker.
yes, correct.
Right? It's because it's cooked in a
It's
pressure
cooked in a
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So pots, pans, potlies,
Yeah, potlies.
potholes, very
Yeah.
important for delivery,
Yeah.
right? Pot belly, potluck.
Correct.
So potpourri, which would be the repurposing of the products later. So we took each one of those names and words and we tried to make sense of the brand based on that. And that's where the vessels came in of delivering, where we do everything in pots. And
it's my belief Indians will eat out more, will also call in for more food.
yes,
Right?
correct,
Your son, when he grows up, he's not going to cook.
right.
I think the orientation of a household or a apartment or a condo
Yeah, of course.
will
Will
completely change.
Right,
Am I right? Are you seeing that trend today
of course,
where people want to go out as much as they want to call in food?
right. So I think people who really want to cook or enjoy cooking are the ones who will cook, right? Otherwise, people are eating for the sake of eating,
Got it.
which is where dishes like rajma chawal come in, right? Because you really don't want to, the effort that it takes
For sure.
to kind of eat the product.
I
you
think
know?
the effort starts 24 hours in
Yeah.
advance.
And I think people are getting very, I think they care about their bodies a lot more now. You know, they're seeing all these things where you could last for a lot longer. They want to be a lot more active and they are more conscious of what they are doing. So hygiene is very important, right? So a brand like Pot sells a lot of chaat,
True.
which, you know, you would order maybe at a higher price point than someone on the street, or something like a rajma chawal, which you would eat because you just want to eat it from a very hygienic environment, right? And normal restaurants would not serve it. But I definitely think that is changing, where
And
you have
are you
everyday food.
seeing Indian families eat out more often? Are you seeing them
Of
coming
course,
out more often?
Of course. Our bottom line is telling us that. The number of orders that we do a day is telling us that. And the mix of food that people are eating. You know, for example, if somebody is ordering a khichdi, okay, they're ordering it to eat. I think it's very rare for someone to imagine or crave, products like khichdi, because, you know, they want to eat the product. So a puri aloo, a khichdi.
So I need to ask you this question. Harsimran, my wife, she usually never experiments with the food.
Right.
So I think, I'm not too sure again what's it called. It's a pork preparation at Pot.
Right.
One of the pork
Yes.
And we've been there a couple of times. She would only eat that. And she wouldn't experiment. Are you seeing this as a trend, or is it just my imagination that people repeat their orders?
No, so people, and I say this again very often, and this comes back to the training. People go to a restaurant to eat what they ate last time. They never go to a restaurant to try something new. I think in the process of visiting a restaurant again and again, you would try something once or twice because you might go with different people.
Pretty much go back.
And you go back to a restaurant to literally, which is where consistency is by far the most important thing in a restaurant, right? In fact, if I have to attribute the success of a Yum Yum Cha versus a Yum Yum Tree, okay, I can argue that there was alcohol, it was too big, location was not, but I feel that at the time we started Yum Yum Tree, we did not know how to be consistent. And by the time we did Yum Yum Cha, we had learned consistency as a trait. Now we are consistent to a fault, where anything and everything that we are doing has a recipe. All our utensils are very clearly measured. There are no two ladles which have a different volume in there. So even if you're going ek karchi dalo, do karchi dalo kisi cheez ki, you know what that volume is going in.
Varun, you're an outspoken man, right? And I wanted to do this season 2 with you because of your outspokenness. You may choose not to answer or answer. But when I have a culinary school and I have a hospitality business school. But when I see restaurants or the F&B as a whole in the country,
right,
I'm not impressed.
Okay.
There are very few which are good.
Right.
Very few. Handful.
Right.
Handful in Delhi NCR, handful in Gurgaon.
Right.
I'm sure the same case must be with...
right.
There are these iconic restaurants. I'm not taking that. Why? Is it... Do we know how to even have a restaurant? Okay. Or is it like...
So I think that the reason why people open restaurants inherently is incorrect, right? Of course, like I had mentioned earlier, that people, and I concur with you that I feel that the dining landscape is not as impressive as it can be.
True.
People started opening restaurants in spaces where they had property, right? And you buy a property, you open a restaurant to be able to kind of do that, right? Eventually, people who are opening restaurants are not using their own money. They are using their family money.
True.
They're using trust fund money. They're using money that
Or
their
is it because they
parents
don't
have.
know nothing to do? This seems like glamour to me, and this seems like I'll
Correct.
add
So
a-
the reasons that
Yeah.
people open restaurants for
Are
are
incorrect.
incorrect, right?
True.
Secondly, I feel that our expectations from the service industry in general in a country like India are very, very low. I think we are just learning what good service and good, service as a product, what that means, right? And I think as we learn more, people will be forced to kind of do that, right? I mean, we are in a mall which has seen pretty much every restaurant around us churn except us. So both our restaurants have not churned, and but everybody else is churned because they were not able to sustain, and they were kind of opening restaurants, for completely the wrong reason. So I feel that eventually that game has to change, but it also will be a result of we as customers what we demand, right? I mean, if we are expecting and we are accepting rather mediocre products as a country.
And do you also believe that VC money coming in, Series B capital coming in, private equity, I think it completely dilutes that experience. You may have the scale,
Correct.
right, because of the immediacy of return,
Right.
but the soul from the food and the experience is taken away.
Yeah. So I think, and yes, but I also think that at a certain point, if you look at cultures that have been able to successfully do great food, okay, and I presume when you talk about culinary scene, you primarily mean the formal and structured dining scene, right?
I'm talking about that, correct.
If you look at countries like Singapore, Thailand, China, and we take a look at Asia, we are nearest to Asia, the governments have rehabilitated street vendors, right?
True.
And they have structured them, restructured them.
Absolutely.
They have some fantastic, super clean environments for people
Especially
to eat.
Singapore,
Right?
Excellent.
But even if you go to China, you go to Beijing, you go to Guangzhou,
Shanghai.
you go Shanghai,
Yeah.
you go to a mall and you go to the food court of the mall. The food court of the mall doesn't have VC brands. They have the street food guys.
Yeah.
Okay, the government provides models of food, recipes, and they tell you, okay, you make this. So imagine the government telling you, this is how you make a tikki, this is how you make a kachori, and go open, this is a mall, an expensive mall, and you go open a clean environment. I think the real taste comes in the street food in India. The moment that becomes competition for the restaurants in that way, the dining scene has to go up. In Singapore, if a restaurant has to survive,
Correct.
you can get such amazing food at sub $10, Singaporean, or sub $5 also for that matter, that people, why would they go to eat lunch at a place unless it's fantastic, right? So the same thing is required here. I think that the government is intervening in many industries, but I feel that this
Is
kind
it
of
a
industry,
government thing, or is it the individual entrepreneurs?
it is the individual entrepreneur, but at the end of the day, I mean, for example, there is no law for street food or there is no structure for street food vendors in India. I mean, you're talking about food, you're talking about hospitality, you're talking about, I mean, your students, if you have to tell them to open a restaurant anywhere in India, let's say a lot of people may come from other cities in India, right? Let's say somebody comes from Baroda or somebody comes from Amritsar. Now, let's say you're a student from Amritsar, right? And the guy says, oh, I want to open a fantastic restaurant. You're an modern Indian restaurant in Amritsar. What will you advise them? Go on your streets.
Absolutely.
Look at what you have on
Celebrate
your streets.
that.
Celebrate that. Look at what you have. And that is your competition. Now, if you go to Amritsar physically and you see the environment and the hygiene and the, related to the kind of, and I love the food in Amritsar, but if you actually look at the base level of what the hygiene is like in the top dhabas in Amritsar or Lucknow or any one of these places, hygiene is not one of them.
But he's also catering to a very different segment, right?
But everybody needs to be hygienic.
But the expectation even from the consumer is not.
You compare to a street food joint in Thailand.
Yeah, for sure.
Versus here.
And hence, more foreign tourists, you and me, will still eat on the road in Singapore and Thailand and Hong Kong.
And we may not eat in Delhi.
True.
Right?
You're absolutely right.
Which is where the opportunity exists for people to do that. So I feel it's a very different way of doing it. I think if you give enough competition to people,
I truly agree.
Right now, people don't say let's go to a restaurant. People say chal bahar chalte hain.
Correct.
The word is still bahar chalte hain. The word is still an outing.
Yeah.
It has got nothing to do with food.
Yeah.
In conversation.
I think there's the whole package of stepping out, the experience come back, food, beverage.
But we still say outing. No?
Yeah.
So it's like saying, yes, if you ask someone how they are, feeling, I mean, are you eating well is what you say in at home. Did you eat well is how you would, ask someone if they're doing well, for example, or if they have a good time or whatever at your party. But at the same time, when you're going out, you are not saying let's eat.
So ISH wanted to have these couple of mobile trucks.
Yeah.
Only from an experience perspective.
Sure.
You're taking the brand of ISH out there, École de Caisse out there.
Sure.
Students are in there. The permissions and even mobility between Delhi and Gurgaon.
It doesn't exist.
It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
You just can't do it.
Yeah.
You just can't do it.
Yeah.
How do you expect tourists to come in? Food, I'm just saying the barriers are so much.
So if you look at, for someone to open a restaurant, you need money.
Yeah.
And money is coming from wrong sources.
Yeah.
It may come from your parents. It might come from VCs, like you said. So, there is, and at the same time, the expectation of the customer that literally a person going out is there for the environment, not there for the food.
That's my view. And a lot of people may hate me for saying that. VCs should stay away from education and food, at least in India, for the next 10 to 15 years.
Sure.
Right?
I think if they do stay in these, let them look at business from the ground up.
Yeah. But the fact is, for them, it's the immediacy of the returns, and it's not their fault.
They're not getting returns if concepts are failing.
Yeah, and the concepts are failing because they're pushing.
Education, they've lost so much money.
Yeah, absolutely.
In hospitality, they're going to...
And that's because of unnecessary pressures, and then mis-selling happens, right, with scale.
Right.
And the customer is very sensitive towards all these things.
So I'm not saying that the government is not working. There are places like, there is a group called NASFI that is doing, stuff for the street vendors, etc. But it's not enough.
It just needs to happen at scale and big bang,
and a very, very large
and big bang, like those reforms needs to be big bang, not incremental.
And we don't need to we need to look at the food halls of Singapore, for example, where we actually open. I mean, imagine the entire Chandni Chowk coming under a proper roof, with proper licenses and proper, kind of permissions and other things, and allowing entrepreneurs or small entrepreneurs to kind of open. In fact, now, we talk about these food cart markets in Gurgaon.
Yes.
But the government has come in and broken them up and thrown them out.
Yeah.
Where does a small time entrepreneur who's interested in food, what do they do? Okay.
I'm sure.
And that is also why cloud kitchens have become more successful, because you can't see it.
But I think it requires this vibrant democracy, right? Requires all these formats to coexist.
So when you want the standard on top to go up, you have to take the standard up from the bottom, right? You cannot just redo the standard.
But hence you have mavericks like you who speak their mind, and I'm sure many more would do that, Varun. No, it's a fact, right? Because I think people chamfer around speaking the truth, right? But as I said, you've always been outspoken. Finally, tell me, 5 years, 7 years from now, where do you think your brands, how would it evolve?
So I definitely think that there is only a certain amount of time that we can stop not doing Yum Yum Cha outside Delhi. I think it is only inevitable that we would have to look at opening in Bombay or Bangalore or another city, at least one more city, if not multiple cities, and probably recreate Delhi in another city, and to have that volume and comfortably, sustainably kind of do it in another city. We definitely will get into retail. I think retail is one area which would kind of work very well. I of course think that the restaurants or the number of restaurants that we have would kind of go up. I do think there are a lot of people who look at different ends of the scale. So there are people who look at really fine dining. At some level, I'd want to take a look at mass dining, what it would mean to not have the comfort of a certain price point and to able to still sustainably cater to a population at a lower price point. And I definitely want to explore that. And I think eventually I would want to take food from India, whether it is Indian cuisine or else, abroad at some point. Right. So,
and that
I
would be
think I've got-
largely to what, European markets?
well, I am familiar with the US, right?
Yeah.
So for me, it's America. I still think that America is the largest consuming market.
Yeah.
There
True.
is no global Indian brand. There is no Pan-American Indian brand.
Yeah.
There is no Indian brand like even, Chinese has so many brands.
Yeah.
Panda Express is everywhere,
True.
but there is nothing for Indian food.
If I had to give you some unsolicited advice, listen to your mother as well, and please open in Bombay.
Yeah.
I think this concept, all the 3 brand concepts, would
Thank
do
you.
really, really well in Bombay. Go to the US, but I'm not going to let you go just like that. I'm going to have the last segment, which is a very fun segment. We're talking very seriously.
Sure.
You can't think about all the
No, of
answers,
course.
right? In 5 seconds, whatever comes to your mind,
Yeah, of
you
course.
just say it.
Yeah.
What's the one ingredient you can't live without in your kitchen?
Flour.
Okay. The very first dish you mastered?
Butter chicken.
Butter chicken?
Yeah.
Okay. If you had one dinner guest who you would love to have dinner with, who would it be?
Would have to be a chef. So I would say Chef Thomas Keller.
Thomas Keller?
Yeah, for me.
Okay. What's the most memorable customer feedback right off the bat, if you can recall, you ever received from a customer?
So, we look at customer feedback all the time, and we have been fortunate enough to kind of look at that. But I think in general, the most popular or best customer feedback that we get is when the young people, when the kids, 4, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, give us a comment card.
Yeah.
And they write about how amazing their experience was.
Both my daughters, Chanel and Shanaira, the youngest one, have done that.
Yeah.
for you. Yeah, just to let you know. Chief Eating Officer, what's your favorite comfort food?
So my favorite comfort food is dal. Just any kind of dal.
Any kind of, but so would it be dal and rice or just dal?
It could be dal with rice. I've started learning how to eat dal with rice now, but it always used to be it used to be dal makhani and butter naan, but it's graduated to a moong dal once in a while with even a matar pulao or something like that. But dal is something I could eat every day,
When you're looking at the current food trend,
yeah,
which one particular food trend is exciting you the most right now?
regional Indian food. I think picking up food from different parts of India.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Who is your culinary hero or influence?
So definitely Thomas Keller, but I think in India, Veer Sanghvi has to be. I think I've grown up reading his articles forever, and I don't think there's anybody who unbiased and in tune with food as much as he is.
Yeah.
So very, very different type of personality in terms of many people have
And
chefs
now
as heroes.
knows his food like nobody.
knows
has.
him
Yeah.
more than anybody else. Yeah.
True. Was that one challenge you wish more people knew about in the restaurant industry which they are not aware of?
That it requires a lot of capital, and your capital doesn't stop at the time you open. You'll keep sinking more and more money into the business.
And if it doesn't work in 2 years, bail out. Cut your
You
losses.
bail out, but the thing is that to get out after 2 years, you have to continue to slide. So, you say, okay, fine, I'm going to have, let's say, 1 crore rupees to open a restaurant. Wow, I have 1 crore rupees. You're not budgeting for the extra 50 lakhs or another 1 crore that you need to sink in.
True.
Post that.
True. What's your guilty pleasure when it comes to food?
Chocolate. Always.
Yeah?
Every night.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah.
I
Every
love
single night.
it.
And I have an HbA1c of 5.1. So I recommend everyone to have chocolate if they want great sugar level.
How would you describe your approach to food?
Original. If I have to give one word, original. We try not to copy or ape or or attempt to look at what somebody else is doing. I think we just do our own thing.
You've been to ISH, right? We are École de Caisse and we are a business school. What would you tell the world, whatever you saw, and what advice would you give me?
So I think it was probably, and that's the reason I'm sitting here. I, famously am quite shy when it comes to giving interviews or having talks with people. I feel that it is probably one of the only international standard institutions, for the culinary world, that I've seen in India. Okay, I've been to many universities, many colleges, and the kind of infrastructure and the kind of facilities and the kind of thought that has been put into the operation is truly world class. I don't think I've seen anything like that in India. And I think it's absolutely outstanding for the culinary profession, especially, and the hospitality industry, because very little exists for the hospitality industry in India.
And that's exactly what our vision was. But more importantly, Varun, the way you are fully involved and fully immersed with your businesses and your brands. Dilip and I, we are fully committed, fully involved, and we pivot. So if there is something which we think can change for good,
Right.
we will do it within 48 hours. And in education, that's sometimes very counterproductive, but I believe it needs to happen.
Right.
It's been such a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much for coming. It was a pleasure as well.
And may you grow from strength to strength.
Thank you.
And God bless.
Thank you.
Thanks
so
Varun.
much.
Bye-bye. Season 2, Walk the Talk with Kunal Vasudeva. But one thing doesn't change. Salam, Namaste, Adab, and Sat Sri Akal. What an amazing journey it has been. And look forward to seeing all of you soon.